Welcome in for another episode of the Silver and Blue Podcast. I'm your host, Nate. Some technical difficulties there. Joining me is my co-host, Corey Douglas. Corey, Cowboys are coming off a really wild win over the Colts that was kind of jarring to watch towards the end. How are we feeling? Cowboys are 9-3, coming off a 54-19 win.
Yeah, I think for the majority of the game, I think it was kind of playing out kind of like we kind of touched on in our preview about like the Colts are going to come out here, they're going to play hard. It's a nationally televised game. I thought it would kind of play out, like a close game, and through three quarters, it definitely played out that way. And then the fourth quarter happened, and it seemed like every time the Colts touched the ball, Matt Ryan was either getting sacked, throwing a pick, fumbling. Whatever could go wrong for the Colts did go wrong for the Colts in that fourth quarter where they were outscored 33-0, which is insane. The Cowboys have now scored 199 points their last 5 games, which is just incredible. And I saw a quote from Paris Campbell, the Colts receiver, on kind of what happened in the fourth quarter last night. And he said that, he looked up at one point, it was 21-19, and we were in a close ball game. Next thing I looked up, it was 50 or whatever it was to 19. And he said it happened so fast, and I would agree with him. And it was just crazy. But that was a long-winded answer to say I'm doing great after the fourth quarter last night.
Yeah, I gotta say, man, and I was watching the game with some of my friends, and they aren't Cowboys fans, but just some of my buddies up here in Missouri, and like we were all just sitting there watching the game, like, and especially in the fourth quarter, like, holy hell, this happened fast. Like, and I remember looking at, like, I have like a little group chat of like all the Cowboys fans of my family, like my dad, my uncles, cousins, all that noise. And I went back and looked at like some of the texts that were sent after the Colts scored to make it 21-19. And, just feel like, oh, here we go. And I looked, and like by the time we'd gotten to like 47 or 54 even, I looked at my what do you call it? My like the timestamps of the text. And I was like, when it got to 54-19, I looked, I was like, it was 21-19 like 40 minutes ago. Like what? How? Like it was quick. And it started with a really big response from the offense, and then the defense just went takeaway crazy. I believe that, I mean, they got 5 takeaways last night. I think it was just crazy stuff from the Cowboys in the fourth quarter. And we like you said, we talked about where the Colts would give you a game for a bit, they play hard, and then the more talented team would kind of take over. And we've kind of seen that in these recent Cowboys games where they just go on these runs, man, and you blink and they're up 2, 3, 4 scores now, which we saw happen on Thanksgiving against the Giants. We saw it happen in the Lions game. Since Dak's come back, I think that's 3 games where it was a reasonably close game in the second half, fourth quarter-ish, somewhere in there. And then you look up and it's like, oh, the Cowboys are up by 17, 18 points. Again, we saw that in the Lions game. We saw that in the Giants Thanksgiving game, and then we saw it last night to a much greater degree with a 33-0 fourth quarter outburst, which is pretty ridiculous. And I might be have my facts wrong here. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard or read that this was one of, if not the highest scoring quarter in NFL history. It was up there. I think I saw some.
I want to say Cowboys history,
Maybe Cowboys history, because I actually do remember last year against the Falcons, they kind of boat raced the Falcons in historic fashion in one of the quarters. But either way, just a ridiculous fourth quarter for the Cowboys, and we got to see sort of what this team's capable of. And I saw Marcus Mosher. I listened to the Locked On Cowboys podcast this morning. He kind of likened it to like the prime Golden State Warriors teams, and they would go on those third quarter avalanche runs. Yep. And like that's kind of what it reminds me of, where you're like, what the hell just happened? Just like the Paris Campbell quote.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said. And as this was happening, I was like, man, this reminds me of the Golden State Warriors third quarters. You look up, you're within a game, you feel like you're feeling good about themselves. And I know Chris Collinsworth kept saying on the broadcast, like, wow, man, this is really an inspired performance by this Colts defense. The Colts offense, they don't really score 20 points. And, this defense is going out there with a little, swag to them. And then all of a sudden the fourth quarter happens and you lose by 35 points. And now everybody is kind of questioning, what is Jeff Saturday doing over there? Matt Ryan needs to go home and be a family man. They have no weapons on offense. They're out of answers now. Now they go into a bye week with this nasty taste in their mouth on the Colts side of it. And then if you're the Cowboys, you take all that momentum, a 50-piece, head into today's meetings with, Odell. They met with him today. They're taking him to the Mavs game tonight or sending him to the Mavs game tonight. Then they're going to meet, Dak Prescott and all the leadership council tomorrow. So everything is kind of trending in the right direction for this team. There's a lot of momentum that's been built up over these past 3 weeks. Now, obviously, it's not always or hasn't been, the most, difficult opponents, I would say. I think that's putting it kindly, with some of the teams that they've faced the last, 3 or 4 weeks. But still, the way they are playing in certain stretches, because I still don't think we're getting a full 60-minute game from this team. But in stretches, they can show how dominant they can be. And when that defense gets to feasting like they were in that fourth quarter last night, it is dangerous. And I saw a tweet from Micah Parsons saying that, they have teams playing scared now. And, that's a crazy quote, because you think, these are all professional football players at the end of the day. A lot of them, they're probably not actually scared, but, the way this defense flies around, it makes you rethink some things. I know Matt Ryan is probably seeing, there's 11 guys on the field. He's probably seeing 22 guys on the field, 22 Cowboys, the way they were just swarming on him like that.
Yeah, for real. It was, they really started, and I borderline felt bad for Matt Ryan towards the end. They were really just teeing off on him. I think he threw 3 picks, got a strip sack, and that was towards the end of that game. That got hard to watch. What's that?
He finished the game for some reason. So I was like, Jeff Saturday, are you going to get this guy out of the game? Like, he should have been out when it was 40-19.
I mean, I gotta say, I'm sure I've seen it before. I just don't remember it. But I gotta say, I've never seen a team doing victory formation when they're down 30. It's like they were literally, that was waving the white flag. We are done. We don't want any more
of out of here.
Yeah, let's get back to Indianapolis. But yeah, really rough season for the Colts, and it's only getting rougher from here. It seems like the initial shine of the interim coach that they won their first game with Saturday, and then they almost beat the Eagles, and kind of see that with interim coaches where, they light an initial fire and then it just kind of wears off. It's what we're seeing a bit with Jeff Saturday, unfortunately for the Colts, but just a really impressive performance by the Cowboys. And honestly, it felt like they didn't play all that well, especially early in the game. I don't know about you, but I thought the first half, I don't think they played very well, especially on offense. It was just kind of sloppy early on. And you look up at the end of the first half and it's like, oh, they have 200 yards and are up 21-13. But in my head, I was like, didn't feel like they played that well in the first half. And it just shows like what this team's capable of. Because again, you're like, okay, that they're playing okay, I guess. And, again, you're on pace for 400 yards and 42 points at halftime. So
and a big part of that. Yeah, and a big part of that, 21-13 lead, because it was 14-13 and the Colts had the ball, but then, the first takeaway happens and the Cowboys are able to go down there and convert to take that 8-point lead into halftime. So when it looks like, they could be going into the halftime trailing, you get a big takeaway from the defense and it sets the offense up and they were able to capitalize on it. So it kind of, it fluffed it up a little bit to make it seem better than it really was going, because like I said, like you said, they were not playing well in the first half. And I think that's a trend that we've seen the last couple of weeks where this team, they're good enough to hang around even when they're not playing well, especially against an inferior opponent. But then they have the ability to just flip the switch and just go off on you, like we've been touching so far during the program.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into, let's talk about the Anthony Brown thing first. A little injury update, and then we'll get into the offense and the defense, just generally. Anthony Brown, if you don't know already, left last night's game with what is now being reported a season-ending Achilles injury, which Anthony Brown wasn't having a very good night, and he just kind of hasn't been very good this season, especially after what we saw from him last year when he was a really solid cornerback number two. Um, but yeah, I've always defended Anthony Brown. I've always said he's kind of a whipping boy for the Cowboys fans, and he just kind of gets the short end of the stick with these fans. And he's always been a traditionally decent cornerback too. And again, I'm not saying he hadn't struggled, but you're about to find out how important Anthony Brown was to this team. Just from a standpoint of giving you some sort of consistency and stability at cornerback too. And again, I know he's struggled a decent bit this year, but the guys behind him, get ready. Deron Bland had 2 picks last night. He's been really, really good replacing Jordan Lewis. I'll be interested to see if they keep Deron Bland in the slot or they move him outside to help replace Brown, and then they use Kelvin Joseph, Nahshon Wright in the slot. I'm not sure how they'll handle it. We'll have to see going forward, but I'm really concerned about the cornerback position now, because especially now, you better pray to God Trayvon Diggs stays healthy, because it's starting to get really, really, really thin at cornerback for the Cowboys. And I got to say, I have been absolutely unimpressed by Kelvin Joseph's play at cornerback, and Nahshon Wright. We've hardly seen them play, and it's time to I guess we're about to find out if these prospects are going to sink or swim. It's kind of nut cutting time for Kelvin Joseph, especially.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony Brown, I mean, he gives up probably a big play a game where, he just can't high point the football and you see receivers going over top of his head. It feels like he gets one of those a game and then everybody goes crazy, but then the rest of the game, you don't really hear his name at all. Or when you do, it's him breaking up a pass that leads to an interception. And, people overlook that and just say he's trash and, we won't miss him. But then as soon as Kelvin Joseph comes in the game, you notice him immediately because he's given up
Mm-hmm.
multiple plays in a row. So I think, I've been right there with you. Anthony Brown definitely has not gotten the respect that he deserves from this. And this is a huge loss. The Cowboys pride themselves on scouting, development, and those type of things. And I think we're seeing that with Deron Bland. It has not come to fruition with Kelvin Joseph, which kind of leads me back to some of the questions that we had during the offseason about how much he actually really cares, wants to be really good and really successful as an NFL football player. And now it's his time, and he's a second round pick. He should be able to step in and, maybe not, fill Anthony Brown's spot to his exact ability, but he should be able to make some plays, definitely more plays than we've seen to this point, because it's been non-existent except on special teams. So it's definitely going to be huge. Luckily for the rest of the season, for the most part, at least until the playoffs, we're not really going against any like real big time receivers aside from like the Eagles offense as a whole, with AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, and guys
Mm-hmm.
like that. But the schedule it kind of favors the Cowboys to kind of catch their ground, get their footing, and kind of see what they have these next couple of weeks against Houston and then Jacksonville before the Christmas Eve showdown with the Eagles.
Yeah, but I guess we're gonna find out real quick about Kelvin Joseph and Nahshon Wright, because they really are gonna need those guys to step up. And again, like I already said, they really just can't afford any more injuries at the cornerback position, especially to Trevon Diggs. So yeah, it's gonna be some Joseph, it's gonna be some Nahshon Wright, and another name that's being thrown around is Kendall Sheffield, who's currently on the Cowboys practice squad. It sounds like he's going to get a chance as well. He played with Dan Quinn in Atlanta. I'd be lying if I said I knew just a whole lot about Kendall Sheffield, but I guess we're going to find out some about him as well this week. So that's where things are at injury wise with the Cowboys. There was no other real injury news that came out of last night. Everyone came out pretty healthy, but obviously besides Anthony Brown. So let's get into let's talk about the offense. Offensively, you know, a mixed bag, but generally good, especially after a slow start. Zeke and Tony Pollard just made lots of very big key plays. I thought this was a really strong game from CeeDee Lamb. Dak had a couple really head scratching throws. This was not Dak's best game, but then again, he still had a quarterback rating, I think, of like 63, if I remember correctly. He had a couple throws that, well, one that was picked off, and then a couple others that that one pick that was almost picked off, that was overturned there, that was reviewed. Just kind of a weird night from Dak, but the offensive line was good. They were moving bodies in the run game. Dak was only pressured 4 times. Both pressures, 2 each, were charged to Terrence Steele and Zach Martin. Everyone else was really strong up front. But yeah, I was really intrigued by how Dak played, and he had a couple very uncharacteristic throws. He sailed a couple throws, missed a couple, but generally, I thought Dak settled down, and it's just he just has these slow starts. It's really weird. He does this every week where he has a little bit of a slow start, and then he turns it up as the game goes on. I'm really hoping that we're able to clean up these slow starts from Dak in the offense.
Yeah, I mean, that's just something, kind of I was sitting there watching the game last night and yeah, it's cool. And I was even talking to some of my family and friends, just like, yeah, the slow starts, you can get away with it. You can hang around because you're better than these teams that you're playing right now, just from a pure talent standpoint. But, when you start seeing these playoff teams, when you see the Eagles here in a couple of weeks, you get off to a slow start against them. It's going to be really
Mhm.
hard to claw yourself back in the game. And you don't want to have to rely on that every single week to win football games. But like you said, some standouts from the offense. I thought Michael Gallup continues to slowly progress and get back to kind of the Michael Gallup that we expect. CeeDee Lamb has really kind of just I've seen a real step up from him these past about past month or so. He's really, I feel like, coming into his own, really feeling confident with himself. And it seemed like he's just making, one or two incredible plays every single week. I like that they got him involved a little bit in the run game last week on back-to-back plays, a little jet sweep action, where he had 2 rushes for 11 yards, but picked up a first down on those 2 rushes. I thought Zeke and Pollard continued to share the backfield phenomenally. I think that which one note that came interesting was that Zeke didn't start due to disciplinary action. I haven't
Yeah.
heard any specifics on that at this point, but that I felt that was pretty interesting. But something else I find even more interesting is a Zeke quote that I guess he gave Michelle Tafoya. I don't know if this was before the game or in a pre-production meeting, but he said that he feels that Tony Pollard needs his touches on his team, and he feels like the team is better when he's getting his touches because Pollard is so explosive. So
Mhm.
I think that quote right there, I think we're trending in the direction to where I think Zeke is going to remain a Cowboy beyond this season, but I think the two sides are going to come to an agreement this offseason to kind of either lighten the pay cut restructure, whatever they're going to do to make sure that Zeke remains a Cowboy. Because I think it is important for him to remain a Cowboy, just for him personally, and then I think the organization obviously loves him.
Yeah.
So I thought that was definitely crucial. Dak Prescott, I'm always uh, I'm one of Dak Prescott's, I guess, biggest critics. I guess a lot of people would say, because some of the stuff he does on the field sometimes leaves you scratching your head. But then he makes some incredible throws, and
Yeah.
he leads the offense, and you can't debate the numbers that he puts up when he's out there and when he's healthy. It's just we got to limit those kind of mistakes because once we get to playoff time, those are when
Yep.
those things are magnified, and that's kind of why the people that have the opinions, like I'm not a Dak hater, like I don't want to get that mixed up at all, but those things that are said about Dak Prescott come from those big games and making those mistakes, and then still not obviously the organization hasn't won a Super Bowl, but it's been 7 years here and he hasn't either. So it just all that combined just leads to the conversation with that. But the second halves for him have been phenomenal at this point, and I think we're only getting better, and I think he's trending in the right direction overall. And we need him to play well in order to, kind of finish this thing off this season.
Yeah, absolutely. Dak was. I'm looking at the PFF numbers now. Dak was actually the lowest graded offensive player for the Cowboys. He was charged with 2 turnover-worthy plays. His final stat line is 20 of 30 for 170 yards and 3 touchdowns with a pick. Um, he just wasn't that sharp. But again, he made some really nice throws in the second half to kind of settle things down. That fade pass that he threw to Michael Gallup was really pretty. On both sides. It was a great catch by Gallup and a really pretty ball by Dak. And then the scramble drill touchdown pass to Gallup in the first half as well was just really good stuff from Dak. But yeah, not his sharpest game at all. He made some really weird throws and just was, sailed some, was late on some reads. Not a super strong game from Dak, but thankfully the defense was able to get 5 takeaways, and the rushing attack was just dominant. 34 carries for 220 yards, 6.5 yards per rush for the Cowboys. Pollard with 12 carries for 91 yards. Zeke with a solid night at 17 for 77. Even Malik Davis got in on the fun with a nice little 23-yard touchdown run. And then CeeDee Lamb, they went back to the well twice in a row on one of their early drives with a jet sweep to CeeDee. CeeDee finished with 94 all-purpose yards. But yeah, just again, I'm looking for a much better performance. Yeah, it was balanced, and you were able to win a game handily, very, very handily with a 50 burger when your quarterback didn't play all that well. So I'm definitely looking forward to a bounce back performance from Prescott this Sunday against a really, really bad Texans team. So we'll see where that goes. But yeah, the rushing attack was really, really strong. I mentioned the numbers for Zeke and Pollard. Let me pull up the blocking numbers again. I mentioned only 4 pressures, but the run blocking was really, really strong. CeeDee Lamb even got in on the action. He was actually Dallas's highest graded run blocker. I believe he's part of the crew that helped spring open that long Tony Pollard touchdown. But yeah, Terrence Steele, as usual, mauling people in the run game. So is Zach Martin. And Tyler Smith on that same Tony Pollard run. I kind of tweeted out, it was like a police escort where Tyler Smith out in space is just really fun to watch, where he was just basically escorting Tony Pollard to the end zone. And one more thing that, I don't want to get lost. I don't want to lose sight of is that's not a bad Colts defense at all. They have Stephon Gilmore. They have a really good defensive line with Ngakoue. I mentioned the DeForest Buckner, and then I'm blanking on their other defensive tackle who's really good that we talked about a lot last year. I'll think of it in a sec. But that defense has been pretty decent this year, and that was impressive stuff by the Cowboys offense, especially up front and in the running game.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we've kind of over this past month where the offense has really been clicking since Dak got back is that we're kind of seeing not all the way shift from the offensive philosophy, but they are making sure they get the run game going. And part of that getting the run game going is making sure Pollard is heavily involved into the game plan each week. And, it's Chris Collinsworth made a comment during the broadcast where it said, the fans really get excited when Pollard gets to the outside because you just know that there's a possibility that this is going all the way to the house. And then he even commented on, Zeke and, seeing that burst from Zeke again, where he even got out to the outside where, he was kind of high stepping out there and, he thought, where you thought, he might even get to the end zone there on that one run down there. And then he got eventually got into the end zone later in the drive. And I thought it was a really cool moment where the fans were, chanting Zeke,
that was
him
cool.
to get the ball there in the end zone. And then I saw his mom, tweeted that out saying that she was in tears. So I thought that was a really cool moment because, I love Zeke personally. I don't know if you can tell from this podcast that, I'm a big fan of him. I like what he brings to the team. And I just like those kind of cool moments where, that appreciation is shown. And I like when he's playing well too, because, obviously, he can kind of hang around, when you're playing well, but, last year was kind of ugly, but overall, the offensive line is really getting humming. And then Tyron Smith, they're going to open up the practice window for him this week. So he is going to be here. I know Jerry didn't shut the door on him possibly coming back on Sunday against Houston. I doubt that's going to happen. But the fact that he's going to be back in practice this week is definitely going to be a huge thing for this offensive line. And then like one thing that you've been talking about for the last, couple of months about moving Tyler Smith into guard, I think we're getting really close to that. And then I think the fun is really going to get going with this offensive line and, even more fun in this run game.
Yeah, and, we're seeing them preparing for the return of Tyron Smith very early in the game. This was not like in garbage time at all. They're rotating in Jason Peters at left tackle and getting Tyler Smith some reps at left guard. Jason Peters looks like I'm looking here, I think he had 19 snaps yesterday at left tackle. So I think the Jason Peters at guard experiment is over, and we're getting ready to move Tyler Smith into guard, where I think he's really going to flourish, just with how strong he is in the run game, having less space to deal with people on the edge, it'll make his life a lot easier. And having Tyron Smith next to him, it'll really benefit Tyler Smith. One other note, it was a really strong night pass protecting. I mentioned earlier they only gave up 4 pressures. Zach Martin only had a pass blocking grade of 46.6, which is really low for him, but he was charged with 2 of the pressures. Tyler Smith, Connor McGovern, Terrence Steele, Tyler Biotish, and Jason Peters all received outstanding pass blocking grades. The lowest one on there is Terrence Steele of 76.4. Everyone else was 83 plus. Just really good stuff from the Cowboys offensive front. And like you mentioned, Tyron Smith is going to be back soon, so it should be a lot of fun for the Cowboys coming up. And maybe before we get into the defense, we're still on OBJ watch. It sounds like that they're going to be adding another receiver here pretty soon, as he's visiting the Star today. You mentioned he's going to the Mavs game tonight. I don't know if they said that that'll be with some of the Cowboys brass or if he's just going just to see Dallas. I'm not sure, but and then he meets with Dak in the leadership council tomorrow. So it sounds like this OBJ thing's pretty close, and we'll just have to see where that contract stands. But yeah, things are definitely looking up for the Cowboys offense. And then they also, I did see a number. How about this number? That's kind of hard to argue with. Let me pull it up. Yeah. Since the return of Prescott in week 7, not only does Dallas have the number 1 scoring offense, this is just offensive points only. Defensive touchdowns do not count here. Not only do they have number 1 offense, offensive points only, but they have it by a significant margin. Number 1 is Dallas at 35, Philadelphia 29.5, Cincinnati 29. So, well, when we talked about how the defense was the strength of this team, and it still is. This offense ain't too shabby either, Corey.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just talk about, you didn't really hear Micah Parsons' name much at all last night.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is still a defense that took the ball away 5 times and 3 or 4 times in a quarter. And I love the moment that Malik Hooker had, getting
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
touchdown on the fumble recovery there. And then he probably could have had another touchdown, but DeMarcus Lawrence kind of accidentally looked like pushed him out of bounds a little bit. So it kind of stopped him, from, taking that pick 6 back to the house. But then you look at Damone Clark, our guy, once
Yeah.
again, he's making a play every single week out there. Jaron Curse got involved and saw he was kind of upset that he didn't get a pick last night. So he said he owes us one for that one. You look at Trevon Diggs, he got beat on the 1 double move, which was probably a lot. And I saw a lot of people say this the worst play of his season by far, because you haven't really seen too many of those double moves get to him this year, but it definitely got to him last night. We mentioned Deron Bland early in the broadcast, 2 interceptions. I believe he was the highest graded player on the defense with a 90 plus grade.
Yeah, 94.3.
Absolutely incredible. So there was a lot of guys come from a lot of different ways. Donovan Wilson, I believe, was credited with the sack. So this defense just comes in waves, and it's kind of like the offense. You just don't know where it's going to necessarily come from. But then, when our superstar defensive player of the year candidate is very quiet and you still produce 5 takeaways and hold an opponent down to 20 points, it's really impressive. And it shows the depth that this team has built. And this team is dangerous. The defense is dangerous.
Yeah, great segue into the defense. Deron Bland, highest graded defender with a 94.3 grade, coverage grade of 94.5. Deron Bland in coverage was targeted, let's see here, 5 times, allowed 2 catches for 9 yards, and then also had 2 interceptions. Just great stuff from Deron Bland, who's really stepped up in Jordan Lewis's absence, and hopefully Kelvin Joseph and company can do that. Anthony Brown's absence as well. And it's funny you mentioned kind of a quiet game for Micah. He still received a really strong grade of 81.1. He still tallied 4 pressures, 1 quarterback hit, 3 hurries. He tallied 1 stop as well. But I think, obviously Malik Hooker had his moment as well. That was really cool to see him get that moment against his favorite team. He received an overall grade of an 83.1. But Donovan Wilson was outstanding yesterday. He was registered 5 stops, and again, PFF lists a stop as you make a tackle that results in a negative play for the other team, be it you stuff a run or you make a tackle in space. That's a stop, and he tallied 5 of them. And I've kind of been paying attention to that number each week throughout the season, and 5 is one of the higher totals I've seen all year. he also had that sack that you mentioned. I thought Donovan Wilson was outstanding. And, just generally the safeties were outstanding last night with, Hooker, Curse, and then especially Donovan Wilson.
Yeah, I think we're just continuing to see guys step up. And like, we mentioned it was a balanced performance on the offense. And I think you can say the same thing about the defense. It's just, you just don't know each week where it's going to come from. Like Diggs hasn't had an interception, I believe, in a couple of weeks now. But we're still forcing takeaways. Michael Parsons doesn't get a sack last night, but, still makes an impact on the game. And sets up other guys. I think that's one thing that's kind of underrated about Michael Parsons is that just because he doesn't show up in the stat sheet, his impact is still felt out there because the offensive coordinators, they still have to account for where he is on the field and where he's coming from, and they have to give him that respect and attention because if you don't, he will wreck the game. But then when you give him that attention, we have other guys that can step up. Dorrance Armstrong has been a name that we've mentioned a lot, and he had a big special teams play that kind of caused a punt to go awry. So it's just coming in waves on all three levels of the defense. And now Damone Clark, like I just touched on a second ago, him coming in and making big plays every single week is definitely huge. He's another rookie that's coming in and making plays. So the rookie class, especially on the defense, there's just guys everywhere. I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one quick note about the pass rush was, Dallas, as we've seen throughout the year, they've been able to get pressure with 4 all year. They haven't really blitzed much at all. It's a lot of stunts. They weren't winning a whole lot of one-on-one matchups last night, and I'm going to have to go back at some point this week and look at their blitz percentages in other weeks. But Dallas blitzed Matt Ryan a lot more than they normally do. Dallas blitzed Matt Ryan on 32.5% of his dropbacks. I'm fairly certain that's got to be one of, if not the highest of the season, because they weren't getting much pressure with 4. It seemed like early on, and Dan Quinn started bringing some heat, and Anthony Barr got a sack. I believe Oso Digizua got in on the fun. Sam Williams. And Donovan Wilson got a sack on a blitz as well. Dan Quinn definitely switched up his game plan a little bit, and it worked. He was able to bring pressure, and Dallas was able to hold up in coverage on the outside. I thought this wasn't the best game from the DB, especially the corners. The safeties were good. The corners struggled a good bit. And you mentioned that bad play by Trevon Diggs where he got caught, kind of interception hunting. Got back to his bad habits that we saw a bit last year. But I really like Dan Quinn's game plan and how he was able to, turn to something else and, start putting some pressure on Matt Ryan. And that's really when we kind of saw this Colts offense cave in.
And that's one thing that we touched on last week as well is that, a quarterback like Matt Ryan, he's not going anywhere from the pocket. So if you can go in and put some pressure on him, you are going to affect him. And, it took a little bit for it to get going. And then, at least to result in some takeaways and different things like that. But once it got going, it got going. And, we've touched on this several times. It was like just an avalanche of just Cowboys takeaway sacks and just, mistakes by the Colts offense. And they just didn't have the playmakers to really take advantage of anything. Michael Pittman, I don't know what he finished with, but it wasn't much. I believe I only remember one catch. I don't know if he had another one during the game or not. And then Alec Pierce.
Yeah,
Alec Pierce had a big play.
2 catches. Pittman finished with 2 catches for 16 yards. Pierce had 4 for 86.
Yeah, and he had the one that went for 45 yards. That was on Anthony Brown's head. So yeah, I mean, even that, the Colts just didn't have enough weapons. Jonathan Taylor, I believe, had about 70 yards rushing, which I felt like the run defense has been really solid the last couple of weeks. So I think that's something that we can look forward to going forward. That maybe they finally kind of got that under control. And I think the best defense for a run game is just to score a lot of points on offense and force the other team to throw the ball. So I think that formula is working. And, I think, we're a long way away from, a couple weeks ago when, Green Bay was running it down our throat for 200 plus yards.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the next thing I wanted to mention was, just how much better they've been against the run. And one name that jumped out to me last night, he had a really nice tackle for loss, was Jonathan Hankins. He was really strong against the run last night. He's been a part of this effort to kind of fix the run defense that, like you mentioned, all we heard after Green Bay was this run defense might be a problem. And what have they done since? They've more or less shut down Dalvin Cook. They've more or less shut down Saquon Barkley, and they've more or less shut down Jonathan Taylor. just really, really good stuff from the Dallas run defense. They've been a lot more sound in their assignments. A lot of their issues that we saw was just just not holding their gap, their gap discipline. They were getting caught in a lot of stunts, which can cause some issues. But it's been miles better for the Dallas run defense up front. And one other thing is just the depth of last night. The effort that they had. I'm counting here. I'm looking at the PFF grades now. They had 8 players receive a grade of 70 or above, which is really, really good. And they had 16 guys with a grade of 60 or above, which isn't a great grade, but like it's a very it's above average if you have a grade in the low 60s, mid 60s. So they had some really, really strong contributions from guys up and down the roster last night. And I did want to shout out Jonathan Hankins. He also tallied. He was listed as let's see here. Yeah, he had 3 stops himself, which is for an early down defensive tackle. That is a lot of production that you don't see very often. So I thought last night was Hankins' best game as a Cowboy, and I thought the defensive tackles were really good in general. I thought Osa had a really nice night. Neville Gallimore was decent. Just a really strong game from we didn't hear as much from the edge rushers last night, and it kind of a lot of it came from the defensive tackles.
Yeah, and I want to go back to just the run defense one quick second, because I know after that game and after the week leading up to the Minnesota game, there was a lot of talk about the conversations that some of the leadership teams had. And, Jay Ron Curse was one of the more vocal guys coming in saying, we had meetings and, we're working on holding each other accountable. Shout out to the leadership team on the defense for getting in there, talking it out, getting things straightened out. And since then, it's been, I feel like, a completely different defense. In a lot of ways, and it feels like they've even taken it up another notch as an entire team. So it feels like it's one of those things where you get a wake up call, and you just need to that wake up call makes you have these difficult conversations. So definitely shout out to the leadership council, going over the right things, that they went over in that meeting, and being able to hold each other accountable. And it just shows that this team is on the same page for trying to accomplish, winning a Super Bowl, which is, when you're sitting at 9-3, and, in this position, getting close to clinching the playoff spot with the way the NFC is shaking out. These are the type of things that you want to see throughout a season. You're going to go through different adversity, and, maybe the Packers game was a turning point when we look back in February. Could be like, oh, that Packers game is the one that woke us up.
Yeah, absolutely. And the defense has just gotten back to their dominant ways, and it's been really fun to see. They're shaping up to be, and this isn't exactly going out on a limb, but they're shaping up to be one of the bigger contenders that you should be worrying about if you're looking around the league. Just with the offense is playing really, really well. It's been the highest scoring offense in the league since Stat came back, and the defense is again got back to its dominant ways, and just what we've become accustomed to. So great stuff so far from the Cowboys, and I think these next 2 weeks are going to be really important to keep the momentum going leading into the Philadelphia game. I believe they're currently favored by 17 points with their home game this week against the Texans. So I'm obviously they have to go out there and play well and do their thing, but that should be a win. Something went tremendously wrong if they don't beat the Texans. And then they'll head to Jacksonville with, Trevor Lawrence might be a bit banged up. We'll see where that leads us. But, if you take care of business and do what you're supposed to do, you'll be 11-3 heading into the Philadelphia game. And Philadelphia just keeps playing well and they keep winning. All you need is Philadelphia to drop one game, and then you can get to Christmas Eve, one game back. And if you win, you control your own destiny, and you can win those last 2 games and clinch the division. So it'll be an interesting close to the NFC East race. I'm not super optimistic about catching Philadelphia. I'm not expecting Dallas to win out. And again, we've talked about this at length. If Philadelphia only loses one other game besides the Dallas game, Dallas still has to win out. And again, it's the NFL. That's a tough ask. So you probably need Philly to lose 2 or 3 more times. I don't really see that with their schedule. So you just got to keep taking care of your own business and hope that Philly drops a game along the way. And you can turn this NFC East race into something really interesting in the last couple weeks of the season. But yeah, the arrow is pointing up for both units right now, and Dallas is definitely playing like one of the best teams in the NFL.
Yeah, I thought, this, speaking on terms of the Philly, I thought this week was one of those games that, might sneak up on them and get them with Tennessee coming off a
No,
loss. And all they did was go out there and beat them 35-10. And it was just like, okay, well, maybe we're not going to catch Philly. And maybe we are going to have to go on the road 4 weeks in a row, despite having, possibly a second best record in the NFC, if Minnesota falters down the stretch or whatever the case is. But at the very worst, you're probably going to be the third best team in the NFC, and you're gonna have to go on the road for 4 games. So that part definitely sucks. But it kind of is what it is. And if you go in to the playoffs playing the right style of football and peak at the right time,
yeah,
we've seen teams go on the road in the playoffs and be able to take it down those 4 games. Including the New York Giants did that twice. With Eli Manning, somehow. So a lot of football left to be played. There's going to be a lot to play out this next month. Hopefully, you get Odell in here, get him signed. Hopefully, he can help you down the stretch. Get Tyron Smith healthy, and figure out a way to overcome the Anthony Brown loss, because, like we both touched on, that is a pretty big loss there, and they're going to have to move some things around to make sure that it doesn't bite them all the way. But other than that, I mean, I thought last night was definitely a good win. Anytime you can win by 35 points in the NFL, it's a great day, and we'll see what happens this week against Houston.
yeah, should be interesting to see if maybe Dak bounces back, or what they do to the Texans. So who are coming in, I believe, with a record of 1-10-1. Just not great stuff. But yeah, one quick note before we get out of here. With the where Dallas stands around the NFL. Looking at the FanDuel futures right now, Dallas currently has the fourth best odds in the league at plus 750, right behind the Eagles at 5-1, Kansas City at plus 460, and the Bills at plus 370. And then to win the NFC, the Eagles are plus 200 and the Cowboys are plus 290. With the Niners not far behind at plus 500. I just did want to mention that just from a standpoint of with these like betting odds, they're taking into account like the road that you're going to have to take through the NFC. And like the fact that Dallas's odds are still that good, even though they're likely going to be a wild card team, just speaks to two things. Speaks to how well Dallas is playing and how formidable they're going to be in the playoffs. And it speaks to just the kind of lack of quality in the NFC. It seems like Dallas and Philly are like the clear head and shoulders two best teams in the NFC, especially with, I would have put the Niners in that conversation, but now with Jimmy Garoppolo out for the season, the NFC is wide open for Dallas. And this is going to be one of their better shots at making it back to the Super Bowl that they're going to have for a while. This is about as decent of a shot as they're going to have. So, just a quick update on, how they're viewed around the league and what odds makers are saying about their chances, especially with the Jimmy Garoppolo news coming out. So this is about as good of a chance as they're going to have. And they got to capitalize on it and keep stringing together wins leading up to the Philadelphia game.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. You want to finish, if you can finish 14-3, go finish 14-3. But the main thing you want to do through this last month of the season is just make sure you're playing good football. These first half woes that you've been going through these last couple of weeks, make sure you can kind of clean that up. And that's kind of like in these games against Houston and Jacksonville, and I know they have the Titans and then Washington, mixed in with the Eagles. These are little things, whether it necessarily matters whether you win the game or not, but those type of little things you need to start rounding into form, and accomplishing little things on the way to the playoffs. So that way, when you're in the playoffs, you can kind of shore up some things. Because I remember last year we thought, they're rolling into the playoffs. They went up and put up 50 on Philly, against Philly's backups, and you're like, oh yeah, we're ready for action. And then you get to the playoff game against San Francisco at home, and you kind of get punked, and you're out in the first round again. So just cleaning up those little things is definitely something that the Cowboys should definitely focus on through this last month of the season. So that way we're not looking back after a playoff game in January wondering, well, this is an issue that was happening, around Thanksgiving and early December. And, we kind of overlooked it because, we were winning 54-19 against the Colts. It was like, well, what happened? It was like, well, you're playing the Colts, and now you're playing, on the road in a playoff game, maybe against Tom Brady potentially. So those little things matter. They add up, and it's something that the Cowboys have struggled with over the past, 25 plus years. So
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
just my final thoughts on the last month of the season. But again, good win last night, and we can move on to Houston.
Yeah, absolutely. It just feels like, the era, like we kind of knew in 2021 that the era of this team was not trending upwards as the season came down the
Mhm.
stretch, just from a standpoint of they couldn't beat good teams. And the offense they couldn't run the ball anymore. The offense just wasn't the same. It's different this year in terms of momentum, where both units are trending upwards, resoundingly. So they just got to keep the momentum going as we hit the home stretch here. So thank you guys for listening. Make sure to check out everything going on at the Dallas Sports Fanatic. Like I always say, check out our socials at Cowboys News 365 on Twitter and at Dallas_Fanatic on Twitter. As well as on Instagram at DAL Cowboys Fanatic. You can get me on Twitter at Nate_Sant77. And you can get Corey on Twitter at the Mr. Douglas. As always, please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. We'd really would love to get to 300 subscribers. I believe we're at like 289, 290, somewhere in there. We're really close to it. So please subscribe. That helps us out a lot. And again, thank you guys for listening. We will talk to you next time on the Silver and Blue podcast when we preview the Cowboys-Texans game.